Hey everyone, glad to have you here. Before we dive into this wild story, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. It's always fun to see how far this reaches. Now, let's talk about something intense. Have you ever been in a situation where you discovered a wife was being unfaithful? Maybe it happened to you, a friend, or someone you know. If you've got a story or even just an opinion, don't hesitate to share it in the comments. I'm really interested to hear different perspectives. All right, enough talk. Get ready because this story is about to get crazy. Let's jump in. I suppose I should have seen it coming. Maybe deep down, I always knew there were cracks beneath the surface, little fractures in the foundation of our marriage that I chose to ignore. Love is funny like that. It blinds you, tricks you into thinking that a few good years can outweigh the quiet decay of trust. But looking back, there were signs. The distance in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she spoke about Gary, as if his presence had never truly left her life, even after all those years. The late-night phone calls she swore were nothing. The unexplained absences that I never questioned because I believed foolishly that she would never do this to me. Then came the night I found her standing in the kitchen, staring at nothing, clutching a glass of wine like it was the only thing tethering her to the present. I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated, then shook her head. I feel like I failed him, she whispered. I told myself she meant as a friend, that she was just grieving, that it was normal to feel that way when someone you once loved was slipping through your fingers. But there was something in the way she said it, like she owed him something more than friendship, like she carried a debt that only she could repay. I should have pressed her then. I should have asked her outright what she meant, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed her temple, told her everything would be okay, and poured myself a drink. A distraction. A way to silence the nagging voice in my head that told me something was off. But the thing about the truth is that it doesn't stay buried for long. It festers. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, waiting for the right moment to surface. Today, my wife brought a baby into the world, and with it, she may have shattered our marriage. I can't say for certain just yet, but in a few hours, I'll have undeniable proof. Given the situation, the hospital rushed the DNA test. Not that the results will change anything. I already know the truth. I'm nursing a drink in a bar, just a short drive from the hospital, while my phone lights up with call after call. My wife, my children, my family. They all want answers. But I can't bring myself to pick up. I don't have answers. Not yet. The newborn is perfect. Delicate blonde curls, just like her mother. 7 pounds, 19 inches, completely healthy. But according to my wife, she arrived 6 weeks early. I may not have a medical degree, but I'm not clueless either. A premature baby wouldn't look this developed. The truth is painfully obvious. She's not mine. My wife lied. The child she tried to pass off as ours belongs to someone else. To my best friend, or rather, the man who was my best friend before he passed away. The waitress sets down a bottle of Jack Daniels in front of me. At this rate, I'll end up spending $150 on something that costs a fraction of that in a liquor store. But I don't care. My thoughts are spiraling, and I need something to drown them out. We were once inseparable. Me, Tracy, and Gary. The three amigos. We grew up together, bonded by years of shared childhood. Gary and I moved into the neighborhood the same summer, and Tracy arrived the following spring. She was never the type to play with dolls or sit on the sidelines. She was faster than me, stronger than Gary, always eager to prove she belonged. While other girls were busy with tea parties, Tracy was out with us, chasing victory. But then high school changed everything. Tracy started to look different. Her pigtails thinner, her frame taller, curves where there had been none before. Gary and I noticed, though we never talked about it. She wasn't the kind of girl you stared at unless you were ready to get punched in the face. Still, I cherished the moments when it was just the two of us. Something felt different, warmer, unspoken. Then one summer afternoon, she kissed me. It was soft, deliberate, hesitant. Her lips tasted like strawberry chapstick, and for a moment my brain shut down completely. "Wow," I mumbled, the only word I could manage. She blushed and looked away, but I reached for her hand. We sat there in silence, just swaying, and for that moment it felt like the world had aligned. But the next day, it was as if it had never happened. When I tried to hold her hand again, she pulled away. Then came the Christmas dance. I finally worked up the courage to ask her, "Hey, Trace, if you're free next month, want to go with me?" She stopped in her tracks so suddenly that Gary and I almost collided with her. He smirked and my stomach sank. I'm already going with Gary, she said. Gary grinned. Sorry, Bobby, you snooze, you lose. It was a gut punch. First, I hadn't even known Gary was interested in her. Second, there was an unspoken rule. You don't go after your best friend's girl. Hey, Gar, I didn't mean... It's fine, Bobby. We're good, he said too casually. Tracy seemed uncomfortable the whole way home. Gary carried on like nothing had happened. I stayed silent. That night, my dad found me sulking in my room. Girls, huh? He chuckled. Can't live with them, can't shoot them either. Thanks, Dad, I muttered. And just like that, everything shifted. The three amigos became two and an outsider. Gary and Tracy stayed together all through high school. I tried to move on, but things were never the same. Then college happened. Tracy and I both went to Michigan State, while Gary headed to California for law school. Our conversations dwindled to nothing during freshman year. I stuck to a rule. Don't mess with your best friend's girl, even if she wasn't anymore. Mrs. Ford gave me a knowing look. Bobby, are you mad at Tracy? She misses you. I sighed, avoiding her gaze. It's just different now, Mrs. Ford. We're not kids anymore. By junior year, Tracy invited me to her sorority formal. I hesitated before answering. Tracy, aren't you still with Gary? She shook her head. We broke up over the summer. He's staying in California for law school. I let out a short laugh. Gary? A lawyer? Never would have guessed. Our first date was a little awkward. The second one, less so. By the third, we kissed. By the fourth, we slept together. She wasn't a maiden, but I figured if she wasn't making a big deal out of it, neither would I. We dated for 2 years and eventually got married. Gary was my best man. It was uncomfortable, but expected. He returned to California after the wedding, and for the next 20 years, I hardly thought about him. Our daughter Kaylee was born 2 years later. Our son Jeffrey followed 2 years after that. Then we got the news. Gary was dying, cancer, less than a year left. His parents still lived on our old street, and my mom heard he had come back to say goodbye. She and his mother arranged a gathering, a way for him to see old friends one last time. Considering everything, he looked okay. But there was something missing in his eyes. Divorced twice, no children, completely alone. The three of us sat together for hours reminiscing, mostly about him, about the past, about the inevitable end. And now, years later, the end has come full circle. The baby lying in that hospital crib, the one my wife tried to claim as mine, is his. That night, Tracy made a suggestion that ultimately sealed the fate of our marriage. How about we take care of you until it's time for hospice? She asked Gary. I was blindsided. We hadn't talked about this. I had no idea how we'd even manage it. He's our oldest friend, Bobby. Who else should do it? She pressed. Gary hesitated. The doctors say I've got a few months before hospice care. You both have jobs. Your kids are in college. You can't just drop everything for me. I work for a national insurance company. They value family leave, Tracy countered. Bobby can use his vacation days and personal leave. I did a quick mental calculation. That might stretch to 2 months, tops. It's not enough. Take it a week at a time. Push it to 4 months. I'll handle the rest. I didn't like the direction this was heading. My wife had just volunteered to live with her ex-boyfriend for months, and because she said it in front of him, I'd look like the bad guy if I refused. But Tracy, this is a huge commitment. Her sharp glance cut me off. Then it settled. I bit my tongue, forcing down my frustration. As soon as we got home, I snapped. Are you serious, Tracy? You're just going to drop everything to play nurse to your ex for half a year? You're being selfish, she shot back. This isn't about you. This is about Gary. But all you can see is your own jealousy. That night, I crashed in our son's old bedroom. 3 days later, we reached a so-called agreement, which really meant Tracy got exactly what she wanted. Gary was overwhelmed with gratitude, thanking us more times than I could count. And after the first few weeks, I started feeling guilty for my resentment. But I was also drained. Trying to juggle work, household responsibilities, and now taking care of Gary was wearing me down fast. By the second month, I noticed something was off. Tracy had become distant, her attention slipping away from me in ways I couldn't quite pinpoint at first. Then I saw it. The way she and Gary exchanged glances, small, fleeting looks that carried meaning I wasn't privy to. It was as if they shared a silent conversation, a secret only they understood. Over the next several weeks, the atmosphere in the house shifted, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. I felt like an outsider in my own home, an afterthought in my own marriage. When Tracy and I were intimate, she seemed detached, her mind elsewhere. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion. The caring for a dying man was taking its toll on her, too. By the 4th month, my leave was up. Gary was fading, but he wasn't gone yet. Tracy insisted on staying with him full-time, and I had no choice but to adjust to being alone. Our daughter, Kaylee, stepped up to help. It made sense. Gary had been her godfather. A month later, Gary moved into hospice care. Another month after that, he was gone. At the funeral, Tracy was inconsolable. Gary's parents repeatedly expressed their gratitude, but I deflected, pointing to Tracy as the one who had truly been there for him in his final days. Once we got home, she withdrew into herself. At first, I assumed it was grief. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. For 3 weeks straight, Tracy couldn't keep her hands off me. It was like we were teenagers again, making up for lost time. Then came the moment that shattered everything. One night, Tracy stepped out of the bathroom, holding a pregnancy test with 2 unmistakable pink lines. I should have noticed the way she didn't look surprised, but I was too busy trying to wrap my head around it. "Tracy, we're 45. Our kids are grown. And weren't you on birth control?" She shrugged, unbothered. "I left them in California. Never got around to refilling them." My stomach twisted. "And you never thought to tell me?" She gave a small, casual smile. "We've never believed in feticide, Bobby. We can do this again, just you and me." Somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe her, and for a while, I did. For the next week, I walked around in a daze, grinning like an idiot. Tracy's sex drive skyrocketed, just like it had during her previous pregnancies. We were together constantly, every night, sometimes twice. Then Kaylee came home for the weekend, and she and Tracy went out shopping for baby clothes and maternity wear. They came back laughing, arms full of shopping bags. Over dinner, we reminisced, comparing the baby products of today to what we'd used decades ago. "Everything's fancier now, but also way more complicated," Tracy mused, folding a tiny onesie. More time passed. Tracy grew rounder, more radiant. But there was something gnawing at me, a feeling I tried to ignore. Maybe I just didn't want to face it. Then, one afternoon at work, my phone rang. Tracy's voice was light, playful. "Hey, Daddy, how about we take our little girl to the hospital today?" I froze. "Hospital? What's wrong?" "My water broke, and I'm too lazy to drive myself," she teased. My heart pounded. Crap. I grabbed my keys, told my boss, and sped home. A 15-minute drive became 12. Tracy was eerily calm, considering she was barely 6, maybe 6.5 months along. Premature births could be risky, yet she didn't seem the least bit concerned. Maybe it was just experience. She'd done this twice before. Meanwhile, I was a mess. 10 hours later, our baby was born, except she wasn't mine. The moment I laid eyes on her, something inside me twisted. A nurse, smiling warmly, moved to hand her to me. But instinctively, I took a step back. This is a full-term baby, isn't it?" I murmured. The nurse hesitated. Her gaze flickered to Tracy. They exchanged a look, brief, yet unmistakable. Tracy gave the smallest shake of her head. The nurse's demeanor shifted, her tone suddenly clinical. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marsley, but I can't discuss the baby's health with you. You're not on the privacy list." A chill ran through me. "The what?" She avoided my eyes. "I'm not at liberty to say." A slow, cold dread crept over me. "The privacy list?" My voice rose. "If this is my child, I have every right to know about her health, and if she isn't—" My breath hitched as realization crashed down on me. "Then you have no legal right to put my name on that birth certificate, and you do not have my permission." I turned to Tracy, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Now bring me the damn DNA test." The silence was deafening. I tore off my hospital gown and stormed out. Through the hallway window, I saw our parents sitting in the waiting room. They must have heard me shouting. I didn't stop walking. I drove straight to a bar, downed 6 shots of Jack, and ate a burger like nothing had happened. My phone was exploding with calls from everyone, except the doctor with the paternity test results. Tracy must have realized the game was over. Maybe it was the booze. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was both. But that night, I slept like a rock. By morning, my voicemail was full. If things had gone as planned, today would have been the day I brought Tracy and the baby home. I showered, forced myself into the car, and drove to the hospital, stomach twisting with every mile. When I entered Tracy's room, she was breastfeeding. I said nothing, just sat down in the chair beside her bed and waited. When she finally placed the baby in the bassinet, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I don't even know where to start, Bobby." Her voice trembled. "This shouldn't have happened." I said nothing. "I went to help him just as a friend, that's all it was." She stared at her hands. "But then he had a rough few days. One night, he broke down and I held him. And then it just happened." A sharp pain twisted in my chest. "After that, it felt natural, like before. And once we crossed that line, it was hard to stop." She swallowed. "Except when you were around." My fists clenched. "For 4 months, we were together. The last 2, she hesitated. "It was constant, whenever you weren't there." I forced myself to speak. "But Tracy, you and I were together too, and you weren't on birth control. I could have gotten you pregnant." She looked away. "That's not what happened, is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Then something clicked. My blood ran cold. I met her eyes. "Wait, you slept with Gary while Kaylee was visiting?" Tracy's face flushed deep red, and I had to fight the urge to yell. "She knew? And she didn't say a damn thing?" My voice trembled with rage. "Tell me you at least tried to make her keep quiet, bribed her, threatened her, anything." Tracy sighed, shaking her head. "Bobby, I know my daughter. I knew she'd understand. That's why we never hid it from her. Yes, I asked her to keep it to herself, told her it was my responsibility to bear." I stared at her, my stomach churning. "What about Jeffrey, our parents? Does the entire town know I've been made a fool?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "No, just you, me, and Kaylee." I let out a hollow laugh. "And you think it'll stay that way?" She nodded with conviction. "We need to do what's right, Bobby. Geraldine, I know she's not yours by blood, but she needs a father. We should raise her just like we did Kaylee and Jeffrey. She's our daughter now. That's all there is to it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You expect me to be a father? To his child?" "For Gary," she said without hesitation. A bitter scoff escaped me. "If he was really my best friend, he wouldn't have stabbed me in the back like this." Her eyes darkened. "He was dying, Bobby," she snapped. "And he and I—" "I know," I cut her off, my voice sharp. "But back then you weren't my wife. Unless there's something else you've kept from me?" Her expression tightened. "No, Bobby, there's nothing else." I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. As if sensing my thoughts, Tracy spoke softly. "Her name is Geraldine Martin. She has your last name, our last name. But legally, she's listed as Gary's daughter. No one else will see that but us, unless, of course, you refuse to be her father." A dry chuckle escaped me. "Oh, I refuse. Without question." Her voice wavered. "Why? He was our best friend. He's gone. I gave him love when he had nothing left. What's so unforgivable about that?" I leveled her with a cold stare. "You talk about it like it was some noble act of kindness," I said, my tone sharp. "But you broke every promise we made. You didn't even ask me. You didn't care how I'd feel. You might have carried this child, but this marriage was ours, and you destroyed it the moment you decided my feelings didn't matter." She bit her lip but stayed silent. I exhaled slowly, my voice firm. "And I will not, under any circumstances, play father to another man's child with the woman who betrayed me." "She's Gary's daughter," she pleaded. "If Gary had passed away and left her behind, wouldn't you have taken her in?" "No," I said flatly. "I wouldn't. And I never agreed to raise his child with you." Her voice broke. "You know I love you, Bobby. I don't want to lose you." I scoffed. "Love?" She nodded. "Mistakes," I muttered under my breath. She shook her head. "No, I wasn't going to call it that." I exhaled sharply. "Fine," she admitted. "Maybe it wasn't the best decision. But I won't call it a mistake." She hesitated. "The mistake was not talking to you about it first. That's on me." My jaw tightened. "We didn't talk about it because you knew I'd never agree. And if you hadn't gotten pregnant, you never would have told me. You made a decision, Tracy. A choice. And you even pulled Kaylee into it." Her shoulders slumped. "I know exactly what humiliation feels like now, Tracy. It's spelled B-O-B-B-Y. Appreciate the lesson." That weekend, both Kaylee and Jeffrey came home to meet their baby sister. The moment Kaylee walked through the door, her guilt was all over her face. I felt nothing but anger. That night, as we cleaned up from dinner, she still hadn't looked me in the eye. I grabbed her wrist and led her outside onto the patio. The moment we sat down, my fury spilled over. "You knew Mom was cheating and you didn't say a word?" I hissed. Kaylee flinched, her eyes glistening. She looked away, then finally met my gaze. I thought what you and Mom did for Uncle Gary was beautiful, she murmured. And when she did what she did, I was shocked at first, but then I saw it differently. It was love, grief, and tragedy all tangled together. Almost like something out of a novel. I clenched my fists. Did you ever stop to think about me? About what this would do to our family? She had no answer. By Sunday, the kids left, and the house felt unbearable. Tracy kept trying to get me to hold the baby. I refused. One afternoon, she finally lost it. "You're acting like a damn child," she snapped. "Grow up!" I stared at her for a long moment before turning and walking away without a word. Work became my sanctuary. 40 hours a week where I didn't have to see her, hear her, or think about the wreckage she left behind. When I was home, I kept my distance. I had too much to process. I knew the baby wasn't to blame. But that didn't make her my responsibility. She was Tracy's. In the end, there was only one path forward: divorce. I couldn't forgive her betrayal, the deception, the way she so easily disregarded the promises we had built our marriage on. And every time I looked at that child, all I saw was them. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found Tracy sitting at the table, her eyes puffy and red. A cup of coffee sat in front of her next to an envelope full of papers. "I'll probably order something," she mumbled. "Pepperoni pizza and breadsticks?" I hesitated. "Okay." She lifted her gaze, her expression sharp with bitterness. "What do you care?" I sighed and sat down, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Do you still love me?" she whispered. "Not the way I did before," I admitted. Her face crumpled. "You don't seem to grasp that you shattered everything when you slept with him," I said. "If I were you, I'd call a lawyer, and maybe let Gary's parents know they have a granddaughter. I'm sure they'll be thrilled." "I don't want a divorce," she murmured. "I love you. I need you to think this through. Are you really better off without me?" I shook my head. "I've done nothing but think, Tracy, and it's not about being alone. It's about trust, and you destroyed that." "But if you love me," she pleaded, "can't there be room for forgiveness? We belong together, Bobby." I exhaled heavily. "I thought so too. But you can't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was." Her shoulders sagged. 24 years, I murmured. Gone. That night, the first person I called was my son. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him about the affair, the baby, and the divorce. He listened quietly before finally muttering, "Damn." "I'm filing," I said flatly. "Good," Jeffrey replied, his voice laced with anger. "Did Mom really think she could pull this off and not face any consequences?" I sighed, rubbing my temple. "She still loves you and Kaylee. That hasn't changed." He let out a bitter laugh. "And the baby?" "That's not my problem," I said firmly. "Tracy can figure that out herself." Jeffrey's tone sharpened. "Dad, she's my half-sister." I didn't reply to that. I waited until Tracy was served before telling my parents. My father was furious, at her for betraying me, but also at me for being blind to it. "You knew their past," he snapped. "How could you be so stupid? A man should never let another man get that close to his wife." As much as I hated to admit it, he had a point. I should have been more adamant about not letting Tracy stay with Gary. My mother, however, had a different perspective. "People make mistakes," she said gently while my father scowled beside her. I shook my head. "A mistake is a one-time thing. This lasted 4 months. And skipping birth control? That wasn't an accident. That was a decision." Mom sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Bobby, you still love her. And she's going to need help raising this baby. That's your responsibility." The fact that she used my full name told me everything I needed to know. She was siding with Tracy. "And just so you know," she added, "this baby is still my grandchild." My father exhaled loudly, giving me a look that said he knew he was in for a long argument later. I never reached out to Kaylee. I was certain Tracy had already filled her in. My suspicion was confirmed when my phone rang and my daughter's frustrated voice came through the line. "Dad, Uncle Gary is gone. Forget about the affair for a second. Mom can't undo what's happened. You love her, she loves you, and now there's a baby involved. Step up and be a man." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. My own daughter, who had known about the affair, was now telling me how to handle it. "Funny," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But I don't particularly care what you think anymore." And I ended the call. Gary's parents were stunned, but ultimately delighted to learn they had a granddaughter. They were upset that Tracy had originally planned to keep the truth from them, but understood her reasoning. The next day, they called me, nearly begging me to stay with Tracy and raise the baby. "You and Gary were like brothers," his mother said, her voice pleading. "Who better to raise his daughter than you?" I let out a slow breath, keeping my tone even. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not that kind of man. I can't just push aside what they did. I'm too angry at both of them." A long silence followed. I could almost hear them trying to process my words. Then came the next wave. Relatives, old family friends, all urging me to reconsider. They admitted what Tracy had done was horrible, but they insisted she still loved me and wanted to raise this baby with me. I thanked them for their concern, but my answer remained the same. I didn't know if I could ever move past the betrayal. Tracy, of course, fought to save our marriage. She and her lawyer arranged for 12 joint therapy sessions. Legally, I had to attend, but I had no intention of being easy to convince. The first therapist, Dr. Jocelyn McAdams, had the polished, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had heard every excuse in the book. She greeted me with a firm handshake when I arrived, Tracy already seated beside her. Dr. McAdams turned to my wife first. "Tracy, why don't you start?" I barely paid attention. I'd heard it all before: grief, guilt, regret. By now, her justifications meant nothing to me. My mind drifted until the therapist shifted her focus to me. I expected her to ask for my side. Instead, she clasped her hands together and said, "Mr. Martin, you have the ability to repair this marriage. The real question is whether you can put your pride aside and work toward healing your family." Ah, so much for neutrality. Different person, same argument. Get over it, Bobby. Be a man. "Hold on, Doc," I started, but she cut me off smoothly. "Dr. McAdams, please, let's keep things professional." A dry chuckle escaped me. "You think professionalism is the problem? You picked a side before I even got a word in." She opened her mouth to respond, but I was already on my feet. Without another word, I walked out. On the drive home, I called my lawyer. "Find me a therapist who doesn't have an agenda, or I'm done with this." The second therapist, Dr. Lauren Avent, at least let me speak. But even then, I could feel the subtle pressure to forgive and forget. "You've admitted that you still love your wife," she said, "and she still loves you. Now there's a child involved. What needs to happen for you to restore your family?" I scoffed. "First off, we were never a family. This child is not mine. I will not raise another man's kid." "So this is about your ego?" she asked, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. I narrowed my eyes. "I can't win with you people, can I?" My voice was thick with disgust. "Why is this somehow my fault? Let me spell it out. I didn't break my vows. I didn't lie. I didn't sleep with someone else. I didn't bring another man's child into my marriage. So tell me, Doc, why aren't you asking her why she made those choices?" I turned to Tracy. She was staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. I glanced back at the therapist, who was working hard to maintain her neutral expression. Like a poorly written courtroom drama, everyone pretends to be impartial until they hear something they don't like. Dr. Avent cleared her throat. "Mr. Martin, if you were to remarry someone with children, wouldn't you, in essence, be raising another man's child?" I exhaled sharply. "Nice try. But here's the difference. Tracy conceived this baby while she was married to me. That's not the same thing, and you know it." She gave me a small nod, but pushed forward. "But considering the father passed away before the baby was born, doesn't that change the situation? Can't you see how this makes things different? Aren't you being a little petty?" My jaw clenched. "Petty?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Petty is knowing you did something wrong and covering it up. Tracy didn't tell me anything until she had no choice. So tell me again, Doc, who's really the problem here?" The therapist started to speak again, but I wasn't interested in hearing more of the same. "Let's get something straight, Doc. Sure, I still love her. Feelings don't just vanish overnight. But how can she claim to love me when she cheated, got pregnant with another man's child, and then tried to make me believe it was mine? If she loved me the way she says she does, this never would have happened." I leaned forward, my voice sharp. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It wasn't a drunken mistake or a fleeting moment of weakness. She made a conscious decision to carry on a full-blown relationship behind my back. And now she wants to rewrite history, calling it an act of compassion because he was a dying friend. If it was really about kindness, why didn't she come to me, her husband, and at least talk about it first? Because she knew the answer. I would have told her no, and she did it anyway. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I get it. It's her body, and she thinks she can do whatever she wants with it. But the second we said our vows, she gave up the right to make those kinds of decisions alone. Marriage isn't a solo endeavor. If I had wanted to be with another woman for any reason, I would have been expected to talk to her about it. Once we committed to each other, we stopped existing as individuals. That's how this works. Dr. Avent sat motionless, her fingers tapping lightly against her tablet. Finally, she spoke. So, do you have enough love left to move forward? You've said you still care for your wife. And with the baby's biological father gone, there's no reason to make her a sufferer? A dry chuckle escaped me. That's rich, Doc, telling me to step forward, as if my manhood is in question, trying to guilt me into staying. My wife and our so-called best friend took everything I built and ripped it apart. I shook my head, narrowing my gaze. If he were still alive, I'd break his jaw. As for my feelings for Tracy, whatever love I had is fading fast. And the baby? It's an unfortunate situation, but she's not my problem. There's nothing left to salvage here. The second session was a waste of time. I walked in, mumbled a greeting, sat through an hour of Tracy's sobbing, then left without saying another word. Dr. Avent sighed, closing her notebook. It's clear you're not open to reconciliation, Mr. Martin. I'll inform the judge that your marriage is beyond repair. Appreciate it, Doc, I muttered, standing up. 6 months later, just before Christmas, the divorce was finalized. Because we lived in a no-fault state, everything was split evenly. Tracy bought out my half of the house, which was fine by me. She had a baby to raise. She wasn't exactly struggling either. Gary had left most of his estate to us before he died, and since I made more money than Tracy, she received several years of alimony on top of it. Jeffrey still supported me, though I knew he wanted to spend Christmas with as much of his family as possible, including his mother, his sister, and his new half-sibling. I assured him it didn't bother me, and we agreed to celebrate together on New Year's instead. 2 days before Christmas, I stopped by my old home to drop off gifts. I had something for everyone, including Tracy and the baby. Not much, but enough to keep me from looking like the bitter ex in front of my kids. When she opened the door, holding the baby in her arms, she looked surprised to see me. Her eyes flicked to the bags in my hands, and after a pause, she stepped aside to let me in. The living room looked exactly the same. Same Christmas tree, same ornaments arranged in the same pattern we always used. The only difference was that I hadn't been the one to put them up this year. Tracy must have caught my expression because her own softened. She hesitated before speaking. "Would you like some eggnog?" she asked, then more uncertainly. "Would you mind holding her for a minute?" Every part of me screamed to say no, to turn around and leave, but for some reason I couldn't. I hesitated, then reached out, taking the baby from her. My stomach twisted as I held her, their child. At first I was stiff, holding her like she was something fragile I had no idea what to do with. Then instinct kicked in. I shifted her to a more comfortable position, tucking her into my arm, just like I had with Kaylee and Jeffrey when they were little. Tracy returned from the kitchen with 2 glasses of eggnog, pausing when she saw me holding the baby. "This reminds me of old times," she said quietly. "You were always amazing with the kids when they were babies. Not every man has that kind of patience." I gave her a small, tired smile. The baby was beautiful. She looked like Tracy, and under different circumstances she could have been mine, but she wasn't, and she never would be. Could you ever truly forgive if you couldn't forget? I doubted it. We made small talk as she placed the gifts under the tree. When she picked up one labeled Bobby Geraldine, her breath hitched. You didn't have to include her," she murmured, tears filling her eyes. "It's Christmas," I said simply. "Every child deserves a gift." She stared at the package for a moment before looking at me, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Bobby." I just nodded. Her hands trembled as she picked up a package with her name on it. "You got me something?" Her voice cracked. I didn't get anything for you. I wasn't expecting." "Don't worry about it," I cut in. "I just wanted you all to have a nice Christmas." She wiped at her eyes. "You could join us, you know. There'll be plenty of food. The kids would love to have you here." I shook my head. "Not this time, Trace. Maybe next year. It's still too soon." She lowered her gaze, nodding. She knew I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just telling the truth. The wounds were still too fresh. On Christmas Eve, I found myself wandering around Barnes & Noble late at night. I picked up the latest Clive Cussler novel and sat in the in-store cafe, nursing a peppermint mocha latte. I wasn't the only one. A few other people sat at their own tables, sipping coffee, flipping through books. Strangers, all spending Christmas Eve alone. We sat there until the employees politely told us they were closing. I drove home to a quiet, empty house. But at least I was prepared for the day ahead. I made myself a simple meal: chicken salad with toast, some chips, and a few shots of Don Julio tequila. Damn, I sure knew how to live. I woke up on Christmas morning with a dull headache, courtesy of one too many drinks the night before. 4 aspirin, a couple of cinnamon Pop-Tarts, and 3 cups of coffee later, I felt somewhat functional. There was just one small problem. I had nowhere to be. No holiday plans, no family gathering waiting for me, just an empty apartment, and a long day ahead. Not wanting to spend the entire day alone, I went to my parents' house. The 3 of us shared a quiet meal: Mom's classic baked ham, a few small gifts exchanged, and an attempt at normalcy. My kids had left presents for me with my parents, knowing I'd be there. After dinner, we sat together, sipping hot chocolate with a splash of peppermint schnapps, letting the silence stretch between us. Memories of past Christmases flooded my mind, holidays when life had felt whole, back when I had a home filled with love, or at least what I had believed was love. A part of me still cared for Tracy, though I hated admitting it. In rare moments of doubt, I wondered if I had done the right thing by leaving. As if sensing my thoughts, my mother broke the silence. "We hope you don't mind, Bobby," she said gently. "But your father and I consider Bobby Geraldine our granddaughter. We bought her Christmas presents." I set my mug down, feeling the words settle over me. "She's never going to know her real father, Bobby. Gary's gone," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "She will grow up looking to whoever is there for her. She will accept any good man as her father. We don't condone what Tracy did, but we understand why it happened. And we still love her. You could be that man. You should be that man. I think you want to be. You're just afraid people will judge you for it." Her voice cracked slightly, and I saw tears brimming in her eyes. My father remained silent, watching me with an expression that gave nothing away. Was I the only one who didn't see it that way? Maybe. But every time I considered it, the same truth surfaced. I could never respect myself if I went back. She had betrayed me, not once, but over and over again. She had looked me in the eyes and lied. She had gotten pregnant with another man's child and tried to pass her off as mine. And then she had called it compassion. A year passed, and not much changed. Work, home, sleep. Repeat. My social life had withered into nothing. Looking back, I realized I had never been the one with the strong friendships. Tracy had been the social one, the one who kept our calendar full. After the divorce, the majority of those friends disappeared. I wasn't shocked that her friends had chosen her. What did surprise me was how many of our mutual friends had cut me off as well. It wasn't until months later that I understood why. One night, I was sitting alone at a bar when I spotted Carl and Susie Dimmick, a couple Tracy and I had once considered close friends. When I walked over to say hello, I was met with a frosty reception. Susie's glare could have burned a hole through my skull, while Carl greeted me with forced politeness, his posture stiff. I frowned. "What exactly did I do to you two?" Susie scoffed. "This isn't about us," she snapped. "It's about Tracy. How could you just abandon the sweetest woman in the world because she had a late baby? You're unbelievable." I almost laughed. So this was the version of events she had been spreading. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone even. "Why don't you listen to the full story before deciding who's to blame?" They gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing, too tense to relax. Lowering my voice, I leaned in slightly. "I take it no one mentioned that the so-called late baby isn't mine," I said, my voice flat. Carl blinked in surprise. Susie's smug expression wavered. I let out a humorless laugh. "She moved in with her ex while I was at work, busting my A to keep everything together. He got her pregnant. The baby isn't mine. He passed away a month after she conceived, and then she had the audacity to try and pass the child off as mine. That's what 24 years of marriage got me." Straightening, I shook my head, exhaling sharply. "So no, I didn't leave her," I said, my voice firm. "She left me." I took a step back, looking between them, my patience worn thin. "Screw her, screw all of you, and screw whatever high horse you rode in on." Without another word, I walked away, leaving them sitting there, stunned into silence. Another year passed, and Christmas rolled around again. I found myself back at Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, joining what I mentally dubbed the Losers Club, a group of strangers silently browsing books, all of us clearly trying to avoid the reality of spending the holiday alone. This time, there were 4 of us, me, another guy, and 2 women. I glanced up from my book, sizing them up. One of the women had curly red hair, freckles, and an easygoing demeanor. The other, wow, she was striking, Asian, with long, silky black hair cascading down her back. Her figure was mostly hidden under a sweatshirt and jeans, but there was an elegance to her posture, a quiet confidence. Her skin was flawless, and her face carried a certain timelessness. I guess she was somewhere in her early 50s. I watched her for a moment before deciding, why not? The worst that could happen was rejection. I picked up my book and coffee, made my way over, and waited for her to look up. "I don't remember seeing you here last Christmas," I said with a friendly grin. "Welcome to the official holiday gathering of the Losers Club." I tapped my chest. "I'm Bobby, club president. What brings you to our exclusive event?" She laughed. A light musical sound that caught me off guard. Encouraged, I pressed on. "Believe it or not, I happen to have 2 Hungry Man dinners in my freezer. If you don't already have plans, I might be convinced to share." I gave her my best sad puppy look, hoping I hadn't completely lost my touch. She tilted her head, studying me. "I don't normally say yes to strangers, but since you are the club president, and since you mentioned Hungry Man, I suppose I'll take the risk." I grinned. "Bobby Martin at your service." She extended her hand. "Angel Wong." We exchanged numbers, and I gave her my address, telling her to meet me at 6. When she arrived, right on time, the food was almost ready. Maybe we were both a little reckless, agreeing to spend Christmas Eve together. We sat at my small kitchen table, drinking a bottle of Burgundy, talking like we had known each other for years. At some point, I told her my story, how I had ended up spending Christmas Eve alone in a bookstore. Then she told me hers. She was 52, 5 years older than me. She had been divorced for a decade, having finally walked away from an abusive husband. Angel had once believed in love. 16 years of marriage had convinced her she'd found it. But after 10 years, everything changed. The arguments turned cruel, the shouting became constant. And eventually, his words weren't the only thing that left bruises. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with a delicate frame that made her easy to overpower. Her ex-husband wasn't much bigger, only a couple of inches taller, and maybe 20 pounds heavier. But his insecurities made him dangerous. He had been bullied as a kid, she told me, and whenever life pressed down on him, he lashed out, turning his own pain into hers. For the first decade, it was just verbal misuse, harsh words, degrading comments, accusations that chipped away at her self-worth. But then came the first slap, then the first punch, and after that it became a cycle. Every explosion ended in apologies and promises to change. He'd swear he didn't mean it, that he was just stressed, that he loved her. And like so many women in her position, she convinced herself that if she were just a better wife, if she did everything right, it wouldn't happen again. But it did. It took a mental health counselor spelling it out for her to finally see the truth. It was never her fault. The night she woke up in a hospital bed with a broken jaw, she knew if she didn't leave, she might not live to see another chance. Her ex was convicted of attack and sentenced to 2 years in prison. While he was locked up, she filed for divorce. By the time he was released, he had disappeared from her life completely. They never had children, something she now considered a blessing. Since the divorce, Angel had kept to herself. She dated here and there, but never let anyone get too close. And the holidays? They were the hardest. With no family in the area, Christmas was just another day to get through. "I know it was crazy to say yes to this," she admitted, staring down at her hands. "But I didn't want to be alone. And, let's be honest, how could I turn down a Hungry Man dinner?" I had spent the evening feeling sorry for myself at Barnes & Noble, but after hearing her story, I realized how lucky I really was. We sat on the couch, drinking wine and watching Christmas movies. We started with Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, and I knew there was something special about her when she immediately agreed with me that Magoo was the best Scrooge of all time. Then came The Grinch, and somewhere in the middle of It's a Wonderful Life, I noticed she had fallen asleep, a soft smile on her face. She looked peaceful, content even. I grabbed a blanket from the closet, draped it over us, and settled in beside her. At some point, I must have fallen asleep too. When I woke up, something was different. Angel wasn't just sitting beside me anymore. She was curled against my chest, half on top of me, her body warm against mine. My arm had wrapped around her waist on instinct, holding her close. My other hand, somehow, had found its way into the back pocket of her jeans. The TV screen had gone to static. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It felt right. For a long time, I just lay there, holding her. Then she stirred, her lashes fluttering as she blinked up at me in confusion. I smiled, tilting my head to kiss the tip of her nose. She scrunched it up in the most adorable way before breaking into the brightest smile I had seen in years. "Good morning?" she asked shyly. "Merry Christmas," I murmured, pulling her closer. We stayed like that, smiling at each other, lost in the quiet moment. After a while, she bit her lip. "I swear, I don't usually do things like this," she said, her cheeks tinged pink. "But is it just me, or do you feel it too?" A grin stretched across my face. "Oh, I feel it, no question." She shifted, pressing herself closer, and our lips met. The first kiss was soft, uncertain. The next was deeper, hungrier. Then clothes started disappearing. I explored her with my hands, my lips, my body, learning the curves of her skin, the warmth of her breath, the way she gasped when I kissed along her neck. Her fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and for the first time in a long, long while, the world outside of this moment ceased to exist. Afterward, we lay tangled together, skin against skin, our breaths slowing. I ran my fingers through her hair, inhaling the soft, faintly floral scent of her skin, pressing lazy kisses to her shoulder. "This is crazy," I murmured. She lifted her head, her eyes still heavy with sleep and something deeper. "You don't have any big plans today, do you?" I smirked. "Well, I was going to prepare a 5-star Christmas dinner, but now that I have a beautiful woman in my kitchen, it seems a shame not to share." Her lips curled into a slow smile. "I need a shower first," she admitted, "and I don't have anything to change into." I grinned, eyes trailing over her bare skin. "My shower fits too, and I'm sure I have a shirt that'll work." She arched a brow. "Are you sure you can handle me without makeup?" "I think I'll manage." We showered together, laughter echoing in the steam. I found one of my old sweaters for her to wear. It draped past her mid-thigh, soft and just snug enough to show the gentle bounce of her curves when she moved. "Looks good," I murmured as she turned in front of the mirror. We moved into the kitchen, where I poured us each a glass of Riesling before starting on dinner. Angel perched on a chair, tucking both legs up to her chest. The hem of my sweater rode up just enough to be dangerously distracting. She glanced at me. "So, no other plans today? No big family gathering?" I took a slow sip of wine. "Actually, I was invited to a big holiday dinner this year, but I told them I had something more important to do." She tilted her head. "Oh?" I set my glass down, exhaling lightly. My ex has started hosting these massive Christmas dinners at our old house. My kids, my parents, her parents, even Gary's parents. It's a setup. They'll all gather around. Someone will hand me her baby, and then the speeches will start. How I should be a man and take her back. Angel studied me, her expression unreadable. "And you're not even a little tempted?" I scoffed. "Everyone thinks I should just get over it. Like I'm the one who did something wrong. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't betray my family. Tracy did. And now she wants me to pretend it never happened." She was quiet for a moment before finally smiling. "So, should we talk about something better instead?" I grinned and leaned in to kiss her again, letting the moment take over. Then, just as things were heating up, the sound of a key in the lock made us both freeze. The front door swung open. "Pa?" I barely had time to pull back before my son, Jeffrey, walked in, stopping dead in his tracks. "Oh, crap," he muttered. His gaze flicked from my kiss with Angel to the way she was sitting, legs tucked up, nothing but my sweater covering her, and his entire face turned red. Angel let out a startled laugh and quickly shifted behind me, trying to look modest despite the fact that modesty was long past saving. Jeffrey immediately turned his back, running a hand through his hair. "Mom sent me to drag you to Christmas dinner. She was convinced you were sitting here alone, feeling sorry for yourself." He let out a short laugh. "Guess she was way off." I sighed. "You didn't interrupt anything except dinner prep." Angel and I exchanged a look, both amused by the situation. Still facing away, Jeffrey groaned. "Just introduce me so I can turn around without this being completely weird." Shaking my head, I smirked. "Jeffrey, meet Angel." He hesitated before slowly turning back, taking in Angel's oversized sweater, clearly the only thing she had on. She simply shrugged and looked away, unfazed. My son seemed to wrestle with his reaction before settling on a half smirk. His eyes flicked toward Angel again, then to me, as if silently reassessing who his father really was. "Nice to meet you, Angel," he said, maintaining as much composure as he could. Thanks for keeping my dad company. Angel smiled. The pleasure's mine. Jeffrey shot me a pointed look. Some people forgot how great he is. Wanting to move the conversation along, I asked, everyone like their gifts? He relaxed a little. You nailed it, as always. And Bobby G, she's officially spoiled. 3 sets of grandparents really went overboard. Good, I muttered, nodding. Jeffrey checked his watch. I should head back. He gave Angel a polite nod before turning to me. I pulled him into a quick hug. New Year? I asked. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. I assume Angel will be, appropriately dressed this time? I chuckled. Of course. Wouldn't want to scar you twice. His face reddened as he hurried toward the door. The moment it shut behind him, Angel smirked. Well, that was interesting. I laughed. Could have been worse. She crossed her arms, tilting her head. And this New Year's plan, am I just supposed to assume I'm invited? Grinning, I met her gaze. Not this time, but where else would my fiancé be? Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh? Fiancé? I stepped closer, my voice warm. You'll be even more confident when you pick out a ring tomorrow. The next morning, Angel selected a Marquise-cut diamond, and I made 2 important calls. First to my son, who was overjoyed, then to my parents, who were much less enthusiastic. They still think I'll take Tracy back, I muttered as I hung up. A few minutes later, my mother called again, her voice careful. Are you sure this isn't just to get back at Tracy? You know she still loves you. I exhaled. Mom, if she loved me, she wouldn't have betrayed me. I didn't bother telling Kaylee. She still insisted that Tracy's affair had been an act of love and sacrifice. She'd hear about my engagement soon enough, and probably tell me I was betraying her mother. By every logical measure, my relationship with Angel shouldn't have made sense. I had spent nearly a quarter of a century with Tracy. Jumping into something new should have felt reckless, but it didn't. We fit. Neither of us believed in love at first sight, but if it existed, this had to be it. Angel wasn't some starry-eyed dreamer. She had lived, struggled, endured. Yet she was just as startled by our connection as I was. At first, we tried to make sense of it. Then we stopped overanalyzing and just let it happen. A month later, she moved in. 6 months after that, we had a small, intimate wedding with close family and a few friends. At the reception, Kaylee pulled me aside, arms crossed. Why weren't Mom and Bobby G invited? I sighed, keeping my tone even. Because your mother is my ex-wife. Inviting her would be disrespectful to Angel. 2 years later, Angel and Tracy finally met at Kaylee's wedding. Tracy had taken full control of the planning, and I had quietly covered the expenses. Angel, being the woman she was, let her take center stage. As I walked Kaylee down the aisle, flashes of the past played through my mind. Tracy as a young mother, baking cookies with Kaylee the way we used to be. 24 years together hadn't been all bad. Angel must have sensed my thoughts because she reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. With her beside me, I knew I'd get through the day. She and Tracy exchanged only the necessary pleasantries, neither trying to prove anything. Angel had nothing to prove, and Tracy, though visibly irritated by her presence, stayed quiet. Afterward, I found out that Tracy, and all 6 grandparents, were convinced my marriage wouldn't last. They assumed I'd eventually come crawling back. That was 25 years ago. Angel and I recently celebrated our anniversary with a quiet dinner, reflecting on everything we had built together. The wild passion of our early years had settled into something deeper, more enduring. Later that night, as we lay together, her head resting against my chest, I let my thoughts drift. My first marriage had been good for 24 years. My second? Great. 25 and counting. Both of my children were happy, and I had 3 beautiful grandkids. Tracy, on the other hand, never remarried. According to Jeffrey, the dating pool wasn't kind to a middle-aged woman with a young child. She had a few short-lived relationships, but nothing serious. For the first 5 years after I married Angel, she didn't date at all. She truly believed our marriage would fail. I'm sure Angel was so sorry to disappoint her.